Next question is, how did I come to question my beliefs in the LDS Church? This is really quite simple. I was talking to a coworker that mentioned that they'd read the book Under the Banner of Heaven by John Krakauer. And I really enjoyed his book Into Thin Air about Mount Everest. And I esteemed him highly as an author. So I thought, boy, I should read that book. And they said, some of the things they bring up about your church are amazing to me, because I find it hard to believe that all those things would be true about such a prominent religion, such a well thought of religion, you know, that's right here in our own community. How could these things be, these big skeletons in the closet? These things don't sound like they could be true that are in this book. So I said, you know, I don't know if those things are true, but I'll read the book and look into it. So I read the book, and probably many of you have read it, I don't know, but in fact, let's look. Who's read the book Under the Banner of Heaven? Okay. Well, you know, it's very bloody, and I don't really know if I'd recommend it for good reading. But in the book, they bring up the history of Joseph Smith and the Mountain Meadow Massacre and a lot of these things in the early days of the church. And a lot of the things that I read in that book, I'd really never heard of. I'd been told, for example, and this was brought up in the article, I think, that Joseph Smith had many women sealed to him. When we say sealed, that's something that happens in the temple. Okay, and it can happen in this life or after this life. Okay, both are equally binding in heaven. And I was told that Joseph had many women sealed to him after he died, but in this life, he'd only had his one wife, Emma, his first wife. So that's the information I had, and this book brought up different information. So that got me going. I read another book called Mormon Enigma about polygamy in the early church and with Joseph Smith, and realized that all the facts were the same. And I got on the church website, familysearch.org, which is all about genealogy, and verified Joseph Smith Jr. and his birth date, the women that were married to him, and also several of the women that were married to him were already married. Well, this is called polyandry, which I'd never heard of, and where one woman could be married to two or more different men at the same time, and that would be condoned by God. And this was a big red flag came up in my mind at this point. And so then I thought, if the church has obscured these things from my view for all these years, what else is there? What other skeletons might be out there that I have not been privy to? So, excuse me. So that kicked things off, and of course, like the dam broke, and there's all kinds of good information out there, and I read several books and found out that that was just the tip of the iceberg, that there's so many different things about the origins of the church that the lay member does not hear about, and they're excluded from the curriculum that's taught in church. And I, like I say, 4 years of seminary, served a mission for 2 years, church leadership positions for over 20 years, and yet I didn't know the very basic things that the person that sat down the aisle from me at Boeing knew about. Now, to me, that was embarrassment. I mean, wouldn't you be embarrassed? Absolutely. And to have me, the real trouble here is people like me that find out about these things by having to go to different sources, we become disillusioned immediately. Because here's an organization, if you rewind to what I told you right at the beginning, this is the source of all truth. And yet, they left out about a bajillion things over here that may have been important for me to know about before I made a decision to dedicate 2 years of my life preaching this word to people and giving 10% of my income to over all these years. You know, easily I'd have $250,000, you know, if I'd not been making these contributions over these years. That would be a nice little piece to my retirement fund. But anyway, I'm fine financially. It's not a big deal. But in retrospect, you know, I could have given that to the Salvation Army or something. And who knows how much more good that would have done in the world than buying ranches in Nebraska and land in the UK and everything else that the church is doing right now, and shopping malls in Salt Lake City. Okay, don't get me started. Did I ever have doubts earlier in my life before this incident with Under the Banner of Heaven? You know, I had a couple of moments that I thought, wow, that doesn't sound right. And one of those moments was the Mark Hoffman affair. Do you remember that in 1984, 83? Yes. Probably some of you remember that, the selling documents. In Salt Lake City, he was a master forger and also one that would authenticate other documents, other early documents of the church. And he had produced some really excellent forgeries and had sold them to leaders of the church, including Gordon B. Hinckley. And I haven't read his book yet, but it's on my list. Long list. So that was one of those moments that I thought, you know, I really should look into that. That doesn't sound quite right to me. Somebody's got a wrong story, or I'm hearing it wrong, but then I got so busy with, you know, my engineering career and things in the church. It's really, I think, somewhat of a strategy with the church to keep us so busy that we don't have time to look outside. This is a key characteristic of a mind control organization, is that you keep your members so busy and you set for them impossible standards. That way they're always falling short and always feeling more and more guilt to try harder and harder and harder, you know, and then and then always blaming themselves that they're falling short. And what you wind up with is a membership that's on antidepressants, but when they come to church, they're all smiles and happy because they have to look good for the Thompsons that live next door, and it becomes a real weird society. And there's a great quote on that says, "It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly ill society." And I think that applies just to a T in Mormonism. To be very, very well adjusted to Mormonism, you are a very sick person. And I would never have told you that 5 years ago. I would have sworn just the opposite, that we were the most happy and healthy people in the world. But my eyes, you know, the veil has come off. I've been able to see a lot of this for the first time in my life. Okay, I keep getting on tangents here. It's
all good.
Okay, what's been the most difficult part of my journey? The most difficult part was telling my mother. Okay, is that easy to understand? I think everybody understands why that would be difficult. The other difficult parts were the first inklings that I had been deceived, that I had been hoodwinked. That's a hard thing to admit, that you've dedicated 46 years of your life and all that money, all that time. Now, a lot of it is not a bad thing. You know, I learned French. I got to see a different culture. I had great times with Boy Scouts. The boys, you know, love me to this day. You know, and some of those relationships transcend any kind of religion, any kind of spirituality, any kind of dedication to a myth. But a large part of it is a waste. And admitting that you've done that, this is something that's extremely difficult for many people to do, and many people just can't do it. I think my mother's in that situation. Certainly my aunt and uncle are in that situation. He was a seminary and institute teacher for 30 plus years, and to admit that he'd spent his entire life catering to a myth and being a beast of burden for an organization that really just preys on its members, that would be unthinkable. You know, it would destroy him as a person and his wife. So there's some interesting things have been written on this escalation of commitment, where the more time you spend, the more you devote to an organization or something, to be able to throw off those shackles and realize that what you've been doing all this time was all for naught, is a tremendously difficult thing. And I just feel fortunate I was able to do it.